are these people?
Unfortunately, like as I said, we have this story or this type of story every election season. And it doesn't seem like Black people really say the same stuff, and not much changes. But I mean, since we've been doing the show now for a year now, I figured this might be an appropriate time to kind of talk about something like this, even though I'm sure I've mentioned something in this vein in past episodes. This is a New York Times article. Yeah, one of the rare times we're actually going to use New York Times,
right?
In this, but actually, let me see if I can get it. There we go. Shoot, I do remember who wrote this. You did put in Reef had to help me out with this, pulling this because it is behind a paywall, but we have means to pull without paying to get the New York Times. The people who wrote this article are in the description. I forget their names off the top of my head, but John Hurdle did contribute reporting from Philly in terms of this article. But as Biden runs again, Black voters' frustration bubbles. So in interviews, Black voters, organizers, and elected officials pointed to what some saw as unkept promises, raising questions about the enthusiasm of Democrats' most loyal voters. President Biden began his re-election campaign last week, vowing to finish the job he started in 2021. No one wants him to do more than that than Black voters. Long the most loyal Democratic constituency, Black voters resurrected Mr. Biden's struggling presidential campaign in South Carolina and sent him to the White House with his party in control of the Senate after 2 runoff victories in Georgia. In return, they hoped the administration would go beyond past precedents in trying to improve their communities, and they listened closely to his promises to do so. Yet some of Black voters' biggest policy priorities, stronger federal protections against restrictive building laws, student loan debt relief, and criminal justice and police accountability measures, have failed or stalled, some because of Republican opposition, and some because Democrats have declined to bypass the Senate's filibuster rules. Those disappointments, highlighted in interviews with more than 36 Black voters, organizers, and elected officials in recent weeks, leave open a question of just how enthusiastic Democrats' most important group of voters will be in 2024. The interviews point to an emerging split between Black elected officials, who are nearly uniform in praising Mr. Biden and predicting robust Black turnout for him next year, and voters who are less sure. Folks are just tired of being tired, said Travis Williams, a Democratic organizer in Dorchester County, South Carolina. They're just sick and tired of being tired and disappointed whenever our issues are never addressed. Marvin Dutton, 38, an entrepreneur who moved to Atlanta in 2020 from Philadelphia, suggested that Mr. Biden needed to be a little bit more sincere rather than pandering to us when it's time to vote. Yep. Mr. Biden's re-election bid and his renewed pledge to achieve his first-term policy goals have forced some reflection and frustration among Black voters in battleground states. Many believe that the big promises he made to Black communities have fallen flat. Democrats can feel confident that if Mr. Biden is his party's nominee, as expected, a vast majority of Black voters will choose him over a Republican. But the question for the party is whether Democratic voters will bring the same level of energy that led to Mr. Biden's 2020 victory. Any thoughts so far before I continue?
I mean, sounds like what we hear all the time, from multiple people, and that he again needs the Black vote and doing nothing to get it.
But I think and we'll read more interviews in this article, but just the idea of people saying, oh, he needs to do more, he failed us or whatever, but no one's necessarily making demands of him now, being like, I'm not going to vote for him. Like,
Right.
I am not, so there's not necessarily any talk of that. It's just the idea, oh, yeah, but, you know, the implication is, well, we'll vote for him anyway. That's kind of the implication.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just kind of the same song. And I'm sure, like, like the New York Times is kind of having that bias, or not necessarily fully, but it just makes us, I'm just kind of tired of this, because it just makes us look weak in
Yeah.
terms of, as a community, in terms of, oh, we know that Biden is shit, but we're going to vote for the Democrats anyway, because like even the Republicans are going to be way worse, although I argue probably not, like bad is bad no matter how you slice it, especially among the Black community. But then it's the idea of like, no one is saying anything in terms of like withholding votes or pressuring or like anything in terms of like, okay, what do we have to do to ensure that we get what we want? But yeah, but it's just the assumption that, oh, they're Black, so therefore they're just going to vote Democrat anyway because they have no other choice. I just feel
Yeah.
like,
Is bad.
and it's, oh yeah, it just feels like I could be very wrong, but I don't necessarily hear this kind of articles being written in the same way for any other racial group. It's always like Black people who are like, yeah, we have major issues that we never have addressed. We vote Democrats in to address those issues. They give us lip service. They don't do anything. And we're just like, like, we want this and not doing anything. But, that's pretty much what it is. Rinse, cycle, repeat every election.
Yeah.
Anyway, in his campaign announcement, which we reported on last week, Mr. Biden made no secrets of the importance of Black voters to his reelection. The Biden allies with the most airtime in his 3-minute video, aside from his wife, were Vice President Kamala Harris, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and the Reverend Al Sharpton. I have not found a lack of enthusiasm, said Representative James E. Clyburn of South Carolina, who was Mr. Biden's most important Black surrogate in 2020. I just haven't found it. And people keep saying it, but it's not there. On Friday, Mr. Clyburn's annual fish fry. I'm going to leave that alone. So those of you who don't know, so Clyburn basically has a fish fry every year where, basically he invites his constituents for shitty fish,
And drinks, glad
and drinks or whatever. So it's just a way for him to woo his constituents to be like, vote Democrat.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. So basically bribing people with, as I said, shit.
Yeah. Probably not even free.
No. But it's just the idea, like, this is, I guess it's somewhat of a tradition at this point. So it's just kind of like, oh, we look forward to this every single year. And again, it's just the idea of like, no one's going in, making demands, asking by Clive. They may be, I don't know, but my assumption is they go and eat the fish, go home, and just, rinse and repeat. Just the same old same dance every year. But anyway, just to give you some context there. On Friday, Mr. Clyburn's annual fish fry, which brings together candidates and hundreds of South Carolina Democrats, offered an early look at that enthusiasm. The state party is preparing to hold its presidential primary first in the nominating process, a move Mr. Biden and the Democrats said was made to give Black voters more influence. No, it's because if Biden were to do it normally, like if he were to go through Iowa and New Hampshire first, the chances are that he's going to do shit in those states, kind of similar to, kind of pretty much a repeat of what happened in 2020. South Carolina is basically what saved his ass. So they're going to do it. So that's why they're making this shift to South Carolina, so that Black voters allegedly will give him the edge. so that he can hit the ground running, and basically every state more or less can follow suit from there. So basically, like South Carolina is being used as a pawn because Biden is so weak, in terms of his electability, that they need, South Carolina to kind of set the tone for everybody else to kind of every other state to kind of fall in line with Kim being the nominee. Which, I mean, what does that sound like to you, Reef?
I mean, it sounds like same old crap as always.
Yeah, but it also sounds like there's leverage there
Yeah.
that people are not utilizing to their advantage either.
Yep.
But anyway, Mr. Biden's allies maintain that his administration has delivered for Black voters, but he has failed to trumpet some of his progress. Okay. Since taking office, he has provided billions of dollars for historically Black colleges in Europe. Where? And he has appointed more Black judges, including Justice Jackson, to the federal bench than any other president. Okay. Black unemployment is at a record low. What kind of jobs are they? The economy, a top concern for Black voters, has recovered from its pandemic doldrums, though inflation, which spiked last summer, remains higher on a sustained basis than it has been for decades. Says the paper that right now people can afford bread, milk, and eggs, and our minimum wage has not gone up.
Yep.
The president and vice president have made issues Black Americans care most about a priority and are running to finish the job, said Kevin Newell, a spokesman for Mr. Biden's campaign. The campaign will work hard to earn every vote and expand on its winning 2020 coalition. But there is evidence of a drop-off in Black voter engagement during the 2022 midterm election, although the results were broadly seen as heartening for Mr. Biden and his party, despite Republicans winning the House. The share of Black voters in the electorate dropped by 1% nationally from 2018 to 2022.
Yeah,
the biggest drop of any
terrible.
The biggest drop of any racial group measured, while the share of white, college-educated voters increased, according to data from HIT Strategies, a Democratic polling firm.
Yeah.
It does not take much of a decrease in Black voters to alter the outcome of elections in the most competitive states. In 2020, Mr. Biden won Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Wisconsin, each by fewer than 35,000 votes. The number of ballots east for Democratic Senate candidates by voters in Milwaukee, home to a large majority of Wisconsin's Black population, dropped by 18% from 2018 to 2022, while the statewide turnout remained the same, according to Wisconsin voter data. Had Milwaukee delivered the same margin for Democrats in 2022 than it did in 2018, Mandela Barnes, a Democrat, would have defeated Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican. The city's mayor, Cavalier Johnson, attributed the difference in part to Republican efforts in Wisconsin to make voting harder, particularly after Mr. Biden's narrow victory there in 2020. Mr. Johnson cited an array of Mr. Biden's accomplishments for Black voters. He appointed the first Black woman. He emphasized the creation of manufacturing jobs, which were once the heartbeat of Milwaukee, but have moved overseas. And Mr. Johnson added, Black voters credit Mr. Biden for trying to make voting laws less restrictive, even if its efforts failed.
There is no try, though.
Right.
So,
and then even then, it's like, not vote for the people that you want, but in this case, vote for the Democrats.
Yeah.
They know that Joe Biden stood in the breach and stood up for them and fought to build the economy that's beneficial for people of color, namely African Americans, and also fought against some of the hate and discrimination against people of color. And yeah, you know how much trouble I have reading this dribble.
I know.
Some Black voters said in interviews that their frustration, much like the frustration I have with this, with the pace of change promised by Mr. Biden in 2020, had led them to question whether they would support him again or perhaps sit out the next election. Yes, please do that.
Mm-hmm.
Please do that. Jennifer Roberts, 35, is a lifelong Democrat and was one of the Black Georgians who helped elect Mr. Biden and Senators Pastor Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff.
Yep.
She was confident in 2020 that Miss Harris, the first woman of color to become vice president, would use her background to advance policies related to women of color and was praying for them to win. 3 years later, Miss Roberts' view of Mr. Biden's promises had changed. Her mother moved in with her because of rising rent costs in Metro Atlanta. Inflation has put an added strain on the tow truck business she and her husband own. Ms. Roberts now says she would support former President Trump if he were the Republican nominee next year. What she wants and has not yet received is tangible help.
Right.
Right. And she believes Mr. Trump's economic policies could possibly provide it. I understand he's tried, she said of Biden.
No, you don't.
When you don't address the things directly, when they don't go according to what you said publicly they were going to, you can't just kind of sweep it under the rug. In Philadelphia, Lamont Wilson, 45, an information technology manager, voted for Mr. Biden in 2020, but he said he was not inspired by any 2024 candidates so far. He said Mr. Biden has done a lot of good. Can you say which good?
No.
But has not fulfilled his expectations. Mr. Wilson said he had hoped Mr. Biden would hold firm on his promise to eliminate student debt. The president announced a $400 billion plan to forgive up to $20,000 of debt for certain people. Both the Supreme Court may block it. Not may, will block it. Black college graduates carry an average of $25,000 more in student loan debt than white college graduates, according to the Education Department. Get rid of that debt and give people a chance, Mr. Wilson said. Nicola Hempfield, an activist and state party delegate in Winsboro, South Carolina, said she has also heard rumblings from Black voters about Mr. Biden. But she saw this as a form of accountability, not evidence of a deeper problem. Really?
Yeah.
Everyone is not happy with the administration, she said. And it's not that we
don't need anything more than that.
Right.
Everyone is not happy with the admin. We should stop there.
Right.
Well,
she continues, and it's not that we don't want to see Biden run.
No, we don't. We don't.
We just want to make sure he's going to deliver on his promises.
We know he hasn't. Do that and hasn't. Right. Okay.
Younger first-time Black voters such as Evan Spann, 19, a freshman at Morehouse College in Atlanta, are also hoping Mr. Biden will deliver. Mr. Spann said he wanted to hear concrete plans from Mr. Biden for his second term. I think what he needs to do is directly say what he's going to do, Mr. Spann said, and then I think he needs to really show up and talk to us about it. Jesus Christ, kid. Sir, may I remind you, and let me remind everyone here, Biden went to your college to speak about student debt, and he said there he was going to forgive your debts, right? He said he was going to forgive any person who went to an HBCU and any student who went to a public college. He was going to relieve all of their debt up to $125,000. Personally, I had an issue with that because not all Black people go to an HBCU. But regardless, that was a promise.
Yep.
Right? He basically told you what he was going to do. So why not keep him accountable for that very thing that he went to your college to speak on? Sir, did you forget? Or were you sleeping or not? Whatever. What were you doing that day? That Biden said that. So do I even need to read any more of this? Honestly,
not really. I mean, there's like That's it.
There's a few more. Yeah, I'm done with this, honestly. Like, there's, I mean, but yeah, it's just like, um, and I'm sure, and I really don't want to think that everyone that they interviewed said similar things. Like, I'm sure there were some people who were trying to say, we're not going to, we're going to withhold our vote and all of that. I'm sure they didn't put that in because they don't want
Yeah.
to give people, well, who reads the New York Times now, but like to give people ideas in terms of, you know, what should be done. But it's just, but again, it just makes us look pathetic.
Mm-hmm.
Every election cycle, it's more or less like this. It's like, oh, like he tried, but we need more from him.
Well, see,
So,
that's the we'll get into this a bit because this is the official thing outside of the coming out of the White House, right? Where it's that, oh, he's done so much stuff, you just haven't heard about it. It's
right.
like
Or you,
that's happening.
or or you told the story wrong. You need to elevate the story, like,
Right.
or something like that, in terms of like, you need to focus on the good. Well, there's not much good.
Yeah.
And I keep saying this all the time. It's like, if you want to see, if it'll be very easy to see some good if you go to a predominantly black town.
Yeah.
You know, any town, take your pick, any predominantly black town in America, take a look at it. If my thing is, if you see check cashing places on blocks,
Mm-hmm.
those folks aren't doing so well.
Yeah, you
You
mean
know,
liquor store,
if
gun
there are
store,
more,
liquor store,
if there are
gun store?
more liquor stores than actual
Right.
grocery
Yeah.
stores
Yeah.
in a black community, they're not doing so well.
Yeah.
You know, if you see more churches than like any of those things,
Mm-hmm.
that community, and I'll make that point, that community is not doing so well.
Yep.
So the idea of like, one of the people said there, what do we get? Ice Cube said that during 2020. You voted Biden in, fine. Then what? What do we get out of it? And we don't see black leadership in Congress saying anything on Biden. They might say, oh, Biden needs to do such and such. I strongly disagree, but I'm going to vote for him anyway because, well, right now it's like fascism, Trump, Republicans bad, whatever. And, I keep saying this, like every time I go back to my hometown in New Jersey, it's like taking a time capsule. The way that I left it in 1999 when I went to college is pretty much the same way it looks now in 2023. You
Right.
know, like same stores that were shuttered up from when I was in high school are still shuttered up now.
Yep.
And as I said, go to any black neighborhood, you're going to see similar shit for the most part. So, but again, this is just a question of what are black people demanding collectively to push these people to do well. But we also know, like, it's not going to happen in the means of our capitalistic society. That's not going to happen. But there still needs to be that solidarity among black people, or making that demand collectively as black people in more of the radical tradition that we had like in the 50s, 60s, to push for that change that we want to see and to get the economic tangibles that we want to see. And again, it's just, there wasn't any talk of that in this article. And I'm sure in a lot of ways that was on purpose to not have people have the idea of like, these are the things that we should be asking for. It's the idea of like, oh yeah, well, he didn't do anything, but just do better next
Right.
time around.
Yep. Terrible.